Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And this is episode 704. 705. This is our Week 5 opponent preview for the Cardinals and their Week 5 opponent, the Tennessee Titans. The second show we have this week, Seth and I will be back for our regular picks, a preview picks and predictions show, but this is preview picks and predictions from the enemy, from behind the enemy lines, and I've got from the Titans wire, a guest that we had on before the season to talk about their expectations for the upcoming year, Mark Mihalko from the Titans wire. Mark, welcome back to the show. I'm glad to have you back. I'm sure it's been a tough sled of the first 4 weeks of the year, and even Cam Ward said as much as he goes, if we're keeping it a buck, we're ass.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad you had me back. It has been a tough start to the season, but I think when we talked last time, we even said the first 4 games were going to be rough right out of the gate with the Broncos, and followed by the Rams. I don't think anybody expected it to be as rough as it's been, but with the rookie quarterback and with all the changes, you knew there were going to be some growing pains, but clearly it's not been smooth sailing at all.
No, what can you say about the play of Cam Ward through 4 weeks? He's only got 2 touchdown passes. He's been sacked a league high 17 times. He only has 2 interceptions, so that's not terrible. But if you look at it, statistically, he's worse than Will Levis was. What is the good and what is the bad so far from Cam Ward?
I mean, Ward has made some throws, and he's actually looked good at times. His last game against Houston, probably his worst outing, and the stats showed that. But he hasn't gotten much help from the offensive line. You mentioned the sacks, but the pressures are worse at times. I saw a statistic last week, I think, where he was next to last or third from last in actual amount of time to throw on a play-in, play-out basis. I mean, he's made some throws. He's had some drops. Calvin Ridley has really struggled with drops this year. I mean, the first game against Denver, when they were in it, until the fourth quarter, I think they had 7 drops in that game. They had more drops the following week against the Rams, again, close until the fourth quarter, and they imploded. And really, that's been the story of the season, just as it was last season. They'll keep it close. Even this last game that they were shut out by Houston, 26-0. That was a 6-0 game at halftime, and Tennessee missed 2 field goals. It could have been tied at halftime. They gave up 24.
Spun out of control in the second half.
Yeah, in the fourth quarter. They gave up 20 points in the fourth quarter. What started in the third, Houston had a 17-play, almost 8-minute drive in the third to end the third quarter that pretty much put the game out of reach. So like I said, there are signs, and Ward has played okay for a rookie, not great, but your point is valid. His numbers are worse than Levis's through the first 4 games, and the Titans as a whole are worse than they were last season through the first 4 games. So it's hard to tell. I mean, it's been a crazy season, to be honest, and it's only week 4. So.
What does that do for Brian Callahan? Is he at all on the hot seat right now? Is this just more or less the expected growing pains from a young team that is lacking in talent and has a rookie quarterback that they believe in?
Well, that is a great question, and that's one that I wish I had a crystal ball that I could tell you. On one hand, they said all offseason that they were going to take it slow. There were going to be growing pains. They were playing Cam Ward. This was going to be a youth movement. I mean, the general manager at the start of training camp said, "We are going with the youth movement." You know as well as I do that's not always a recipe for success in the NFL, especially early. Callahan already turned over play calling duties to quarterback coach Bo Hardigree, and I would have to think that he is on a tremendous. I think his seat is really hot, just because I mean there has been no real growth, and I agree with you that their roster isn't the best, and they have severe depth issues, um, which but all that has to be factored in. And I listened to Callahan speak this week. Like you said, he's always concerned, but he feels like he has the support of the front office. So I think there's going to be a give and take there. How much can the fan base take? How much, that's going to eventually fall squarely on Callahan? And, do they have another option even on the staff as an interim basis? I mean, you have to look at all those things. But his seat is definitely hot, and he's got to do something soon, or I don't think he can, survive. I don't think he can survive another, if they get shut out this week by Arizona, I don't think he can survive that. I really don't.
It has to be especially a little bit hot because since they fired Rand Carthon in the front office, Callahan's not this guy's dude. So yeah, you can imagine that he drafted Cam Ward, brought in guys, but he might want to bring in his coach.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the rookie class that they had, I think we talked about it right after the draft. That rookie class has been, if there's been one like high point of this year so far, it's the way those rookies have come on scene. Now they all haven't like made tremendous strides. I mean, Oladejo's still working his way, but he's in the rotation as our second round pick. But Ayamanor is their leading receiver over Ridley. DK has scored like 3 touchdowns that have been called back for penalty. One on a punt return. One on a run, and he's made some big plays, and it showed that speed and explosiveness. And so you're absolutely right. Borgonzi didn't bring in Callahan, which complicates this whole dynamic they have there. And I think it was a bit of a shock. I could tell Titans a lot. We discussed this when they hired Borgonzi. Was Callahan going to be safe? And they made the decision to keep him. So now it's almost like, do you ride it out for the year or rip the Band-Aid off early? I don't know. Like I said, I don't think he can survive another shutout, another blowout, another massive collapse by the defense or any of that. And I don't know. His seat's got to be really hot. I wouldn't want to be him.
Tell me about both the offense and the defense. What are the bright spots? What do they do well offensively, defensively, if anything at all? And what have been the troubles? Because statistically, they're the league's worst scoring offense and one of the worst defenses in terms of allowing points. What are the bright spots on both sides of the ball? And what are the issues on both sides of the ball?
All right, we'll start with the offense. They can run the ball. They showed last week, Tony Pollard, yes, he only had like 64 yards, but that was on 15 carries. It went, and that included 3 right at the end of the game when, the game was over, and they were at the 1 yard line. So they were just punching it out, trying to get out of the end zone, get out of their own way because they had downed the ball. He had at that point, he had like 11 or 12 carries for like 60 yards. So he was almost averaging almost 5 yards a carry at that point. He's ran the ball well for 3 games. And the game he didn't run the ball well was against Indianapolis, and they were missing the entire right side of their offensive line because Zeitler and Latham were out. So that's not really, to me, that's not really a hit on the back. That's tough matchup with reserves to your offensive line. You're asking for disaster. So they can run the ball and they can establish it and be successful. They've had receivers open. Like I said, they had some drops. They've missed some passes. So that's that. But they can't sustain anything. It's like they'll get 2 or 3 good runs and maybe mix in a nice throw, and they'll hit the 30-yard line, 40-yard line, and they will just bog down. I mean, through the first 2 weeks of the season, Joey Sly was 10 for 10 on field goals. So they were moving the ball in those first 2 games. And then against Indianapolis, he missed 2 60-plus yarders where they kind of got knocked out of field goal range when they had moved the ball. And it was a very similar thing. And even last week, like I said, that first half would have been 6-6 if he made 2 extremely makeable field goals. I mean, they were 41 and 43 yards. In today's NFL, those are chip shots for these kickers. That game 6-6 at halftime, it's a totally different game. Defensively, their numbers are a bit skewed, but they do a good job stopping the run, but they seem to give up a big play. In every game, they were holding the teams to, below 4 yards a carry. Then they gave up a 40-yard run to, like in week 2, they gave up a 43-yard run to Nakua on an end around with a missed tackle. So they don't tackle well, especially in their secondary. And their corners in coverage are an issue. They just traded away Brownlee, which was a shocking move to a lot of people because he was one of the starters. And L'Jarius Sneed has been a bust. He only played like 3 games last year, 4 games last year. And, he gave up the critical play, the momentum changing play against Houston. They had a 2nd and 22 or 2nd and 32 with Houston backed up, and he gave up basically an uncontested 37-yard catch to Nico Collins. You can't do that. When you're a struggling team, you can't give up those big chunk plays like that. And he was a target in the Rams game with Nakua and Devontae Adams, and he didn't do any better against Indianapolis either. So their secondary is their corners right now. Need to be need to step up their game. But like I said, they're solid against the run for at least 3 quarters. That's been the problem. The offense hasn't sustained the drive, so the defense is always on the field. And it seems like end of the 3rd quarter, beginning of the 4th, they'll give up that big play. Last game it was that pass. The week before it was a run by Jonathan Taylor. It just seems like every game there's a play, and then from that point on, the floodgates open and the wheels fall off. So, I mean, it should be a good game for at least a half this week. I haven't got to see Arizona play. I missed them on Thursday night. I mean, I looked at them, but I mean, all 4 games with the Titans have played have been good for a half. At least competitive for a half, and then the second half, the other team takes control. Which was the case last year, which gets back to Callahan and his job security. So,
Coming up next on the Res FC podcast, best our Cardinals talking lead. Let's move on to talking about the matchups in this game. What are the keys to winning? What matchups will we look at most? That's coming up next on Rise FC Red. We're back on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, talking to Mark Mihalko from the Titans Wire. Now let's look at this game, Cardinals-Titans. Titans have struggled. The Cardinals are 2-2. They've played a bunch of one-score games. They're lost their last two games on a last-second field goal, and there are lots of concerns. They lost James Conner for the season. The news came out today that Trey Benson goes on injured reserve. Well, he'll miss 4 to 6 weeks, which means that the Cardinals are down to their third and fourth string running backs against this Titans team, where it's going to be Amari DiMercato and Michael Carter against that defense. First and foremost, the Titans, if they're going to upset the Cardinals, and they're big underdogs right now, what would have to happen? How would you see this game going if the Titans were to pick up their first win of the season and upset the Cardinals? What would it take?
I think it would take a couple of things. I think they need to establish the run, and a bit of good news for the Titans is they're potentially getting Tajay Spears back to complement Tony Pollard in the backfield, which would add, another explosive weapon, who could help out as a receiver, an outlet receiver for Ward, and just add a little bit of speed and stuff to the backfield. Pollard, shifty, but he's been more of a physical back than an explosive back this year. For the Titans to win, though, they have to hit on some big plays. If there's been one thing that has been missing through 4 weeks, and there's been a lot of issues, is they have not hit the chunk plays down the field. They've missed a couple. They've had to check down on a few, and he's been sacked on a few. So if they can hit a big play, or especially if they can hit a big play early and get some momentum, that would help the offense. And whether that comes in the run game or the pass game, it doesn't really matter. I think their longest run is like 12 yards, or no, they had a 28-yard run in week 3, I think it was. And that's like their longest rush of the year. And I think their longest pass was like 32 yards. So we're not talking like, those big quick strike, one score things. And they're having to, string together 8, 9, 10, 12 plays. And, you guys know as well as I do, that's a recipe for disaster in the NFL. So
yeah, and I've noticed something that, after they got the 4 takeaways against the Broncos, but they turned the ball over twice themselves. They've only had 1 takeaway in the last 3 games, and that's, when you're turning the ball over, because they've turned the ball over at least once every game, and you're not taking the ball away, that really makes things worse.
Yeah. And you know what, to be honest, though, they've actually protected the ball really well in comparison to, last year. Ward does have the 2 picks. The one he threw last game, hurt because it was still a ball game at that point, and they were actually moving the ball when he threw it. But you're going to have that. He's a rookie. I mean, all quarterbacks throw picks, but rookies are going to. They have turned the ball over, which has given away some momentum, but they haven't been the one against the Colts was a pick 6 on like the first drive of the game, and it was just a misread. And those you're going to live with those. Yeah, you have to with a quarterback making his 3rd start. So.
Any particular matchups, like individual or areas, position matchups that you're going to have your eye on in particular this game?
I'm going to have. I'm definitely going to have my eye on the offensive line, especially whoever Josh Sweat lines up opposite. If it's Dan Moore's he's struggled this season, the free agent acquisition, which everybody kind of knew that he was going to. But if it's not Dan Moore, most likely they're still going to have a backup at right tackle because I haven't heard that Latham's going to be back yet. They were going to try him out today, and I didn't see the practice report before I got on to see if he went. He's missed the last last 3 weeks after going out in the third quarter of the opener. So really, it's going to be the pass rush against the tackles, whoever they end up being. Because if they could just hold up a little bit and allow Ward to settle in and throw on time, that would be a huge step in the right direction.
I think on the other side of the ball, what I'm going to be watching as well is because obviously Jarius Sneed has not been great, but he's got a big task with Marvin Harrison Jr., who's been inconsistent. But I think that'll be an important matchup because Marv is probably the type of the receiver that Sneed's going to want to shut down, but he hasn't really done that. So, and I'm interesting because it's especially since the Titans only have 4 sacks this season. Jeffrey Simmons has 2 of them. Would be to watch Jeffrey Simmons, their best defensive player, up against the Cardinals' interior offensive line, which has struggled this year.
Simmons is playing. This is probably Simmons' best season as a player as a whole. He has been dominant. And, they're playing without Devondre Sweat, who's on injury reserve for another couple weeks. But Simmons has been their pass rush. They've got zero production from their edge rushers. I think Arden Key ended up with a half sack or maybe a full sack last week. That was the first sack by somebody, not named Simmons or a defensive back this season. And they need to get edge pressure. Simmons, he has been, like I said, he has been dominant, and he's shown no signs of slowing down. That matchup between Snead and Harrison is one that, if you'd asked me, before the season, I would have said, it could have been a draw. I don't know. Snead hasn't played well at all. And I don't even know if he's going to end up being, if they're going to let him follow or they're going to play sides. Last game they used, somebody they had just picked up on, at the end of the preseason, Armour Davis, and he played pretty well. He came over from Baltimore. It was never a question of talent. It was one of those ones where it was always he had the injury bug follow him around. And, he's healthy and he's familiar with the defense. And, he was solid last week. So we'll see how, that matchup goes. The matchup I'm going to watch, and I don't know how it's going to be impacted now that, with the issues you mentioned about the running game with the loss of Connor and your other back, is the inside linebackers. The Titans inside linebackers make tackles, but they're usually a bit down the field. They're not quite right at the line of scrimmage. And, if they can get that, if they can turn those 3-4 yard gains into 1-2 yard gains, that would be a big help as, getting teams off the field. Because it seems like teams are able to stay on track, get them into that 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, where it's tough to play defense, and get teams off the field. So, but yeah, I mean, the pass rushes, Titans pass rush, it's a struggle. The struggle is real.
Coming up next on the Rest of Your Podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk. Let's move on. Look at this game. What do we predict will happen? Picks, predictions, and more. That's coming up next on Res of Red. Back on the Res of Podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web, talking to Mark Mihalko from the Titans Wires. We are now in the preview. We're in the predictions part of this game. Cardinals 8.5, 9.5 point favorites, depending on the sports book you're looking at. How do you see this game playing out? What do you? Is it another script of competitive for a half and falling apart? What do you see from this Titans team against the Cardinals?
Until they show me something else, I kind of expect that every week. I hate to say that because I'm usually optimistic. I actually picked them to win once this year. Um, once, only once, but I did pick them to win once. But I until they show me something else and they can show me that they can close out a game, I'm gonna think that that's gonna be the script because I've seen it now for almost a full season last year minus a couple games and through 4 games this year. So until they show that they can close out a game in the fourth quarter or in the second half, I think that's going to be the same script. They'll keep it close in the first half, and then eventually that mistake, that penalty, that turnover, that big play by Arizona is going to just open the floodgates. I actually think they might, cover that 9.5 is such a huge number for me.
Yeah.
I don't have them, winning, but I have them covering. I'm leaning towards something like 21, 21-13, 21, 14, somewhere in that 20 to 20, something like that. I mean, like I said, they should have had 6 points last week with 2 missed field goals. And so, yeah, like I said, I don't see the Titans winning this one because I think they fall apart, but I think it's going to be closer than 9.5 points.
And I think the Cardinals, who badly need to get well game, are going to take advantage, and I think it'll be. I think they'll come out stronger, and it'll be a little bit of a flipped script. Is that the Titans will fall behind early and then get some garbage time points. I've got 27-13 Cardinals in this one, but let's talk some of the individual performances. What do you expect to see from Cam Ward? Does he throw a touchdown pass? Does he throw an interception in this game?
From everything I've seen with War, I know it's regular season games, but I watched a lot of training camp, especially they had, 2 weeks of joint practices. And the one thing they said during joint practices, and this was done, even the opposing team said this, was Ward bounced back after a rough performance. He had a rough performance on day 1 of the joint practice, looked sharp week 2. That's been the theme, that he's a tireless worker. He knows. I see him bouncing back. Now, I don't once again, I don't see him, throwing for coming out and throwing for 350, but I could see him completing about 60% of his passes and breaking 200 with at least with a touchdown pass, maybe 2, especially if the script plays out like you said, and Arizona comes out early and they get into a prevent situation, which is where I think he threw at least 1 touchdown. I think there was another one called back that ended up turning into a rushing touchdown for Pollard against the Colts. But yeah, I think that he throws at least 1, maybe 2 touchdowns, and I'll never take the interception off the table. He's a rookie and he's a gunslinger. So I mean, yeah, I expect 1 a week. I really do.
Okay. All right. How do you think the run game will look for Tennessee?
I think that if Tennessee has a shot, they have to get the run game going. Pollard's he had 3 of the 4 games. Pollard's broke 60 yards. He had 98, I think, in week 2 against the Rams. So I mean, I could see Pollard going for about at least 60, and now with Spears back, if they work it, if Spears comes back, I mean, they opened his window and all signs pointed that he was going to be available. If they use him, he could put in. I think the Titans could break 100 yards in some combination against the Cardinals, and they have to. With the rookie quarterback, with the struggles on the outside with drops, they have to get that run game going, and they have to lean on that running game. And if they do that, it's I grew up a Steelers fan, so I'm kind of used to ugly football, and that's ugly, and that's ugly football. But you know what? It wins games. I mean, and that's really what needs to happen. whether or not it's ugly or not. They need a win. Callahan needs a win.
They do. No, the Cardinals need a win too. That's going to be the interesting thing, is that this is a Cardinals team that is hungry because they're frustrated by the losses, but going up against a desperate Titans team. And, people made fun of what Cam Ward said. Like, he's just like, we need to lock in. He's not saying that they can't win. He's just saying we haven't. We need to do more. We're a bad team right now. And so with that, it'll be an interesting weekend to see if you get the competitive push from the Titans, or if the Cardinals stomp the Titans to the ground, or if it's one of those cases where they compete early, fade late. That is all possible for all of those. So thank you, Mark, for your time. That will wrap up this edition of the Rise of C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. You can find Mark's work on the Titans Wire, along with a bunch of other people who do the work on that site. Mark, thank you so much for your time. I don't know how often we'll have you on, because the Cardinals and Titans don't play very often, do they?
No, not at all. I think it's just what I just looked it up the other day. I think it's just only the 13th or 14th matchup, 15th, something like that. It's not very, and a lot of and some of those were early. I think the last time these two teams got together, I think, was 2021, and the Cardinals won in Nashville, 32-13 or something, 32-16. I don't know. It was a while ago.
It was. All right. Thank you, Mark, for some of your time. We'll be back. Seth and I will be back for another show later this week, and I'll wrap this up show. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise up, Sea Red.
Rise!